Of course.
All right.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. This is Senate IT and Institutions. It is January 29th. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to go over the governor's recommended capital budget with Mr. Kramer. And then we're also going to go later on to hear from Lisa Govin, who is with the Joint Fiscal Office, about legislative information technology. So we're hitting two of our three areas today, which is terrific. And I believe you know everyone here, so I don't think we need to do introductions at this point. So Nick Kramer, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Committee members, good to see you again, Senators. Thank you, as always, for having us back. Really appreciate your time. As I promised a couple weeks ago, back to deliver the goods. This is the governor's recommended capital bill, which officially became public yesterday during the speech. I want to first start with a shout out to the BGS team, Cole and Emily and Commissioner Ranoli, who's not here today. But they were really the kind of engine behind compiling this booklet, and to the folks at the print shop who did, every year do kind of a heroic effort this time of year to get everything out and printed and looking beautiful. So big thanks to them. Worked in close collaboration this year. So speaking of this big, beautiful booklet, we have very limited time today to go through what, is the culmination of a very long process on our end, and will be a very long process on your end. So I'm going to keep my remarks pretty high level and kind of do a summary, and this is more of an orientation to where everything is at. Certainly stop me if you have any questions and want to dive into anything, but if it seems like kind of a rushed or quick presentation, it's just for the interest of time and acknowledging that you will likely all hear from every single one of the departments implicated in this budget in greater detail as the session moves on. But so just in terms of a quick introduction to this booklet, which you may already have had a chance to peruse, it is divided up into tabs. The tabs in the booklet mirror pretty much exactly the sections in the spreadsheet. We'll spend probably the bulk of the time today just going through the spreadsheet, which is kind of the skeleton of the bill, and gives all the numbers compiled in one place. But I do, just so that they're not lost in the shuffle, there's a lot of really valuable information in the booklet. There's, of course, the table of contents. There is a letter from the governor, which can be found on the flip side of this kind of beautiful cover page, with some opening remarks from the governor. We have prepared an actual draft bill again this year. Of course, your folks at Ledge Council will be working to make amendments to that as you all make changes to the structure. But we feel like that's just a helpful starting point so that we're all looking at the same language. So there's a draft capital bill that reflects our recommendations right before the table of contents. There are some policy items at the end of that I will get to at the end of the presentation. Like I said, the bulk of these sections, the Agency of Administration, Agency of Human Services, and so on, these provide narratives for every line that is in the spreadsheet. So any single line item in the spreadsheet should have a corresponding short paragraph description. That's meant primarily as a reference, so that if you're going through the spreadsheet, you're like, oh, what was that? Asa Bloomer in Rutland. You can flip. There's sort of a place to ground. There will be a lot more detail provided in testimony in every single project. And so those are not meant to be comprehensive, but just kind of a point of reference. The last thing that I'll just draw attention to in the booklet is section 1 in the tab that's called the Administration Forward. There are a couple of pages, I think just 2, on the CAT fund. Members will recall I was in here a couple of weeks ago talking about the cash fund, giving some background. This, I think, fair to say, continues to be a major priority for the administration and kind of a linchpin piece of how we are funding our capital projects this year. And given, some members new to this committee, and things are always changing in this building, this document gives a little bit of the history of the cash fund and some of the technical details, the statutory funding transfer, and then some discussion about some policy decisions that, have been ongoing and kind of where the administration lands on those. So I'll pause there in case there's any questions about the orientation of the book.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So BGS normally do this every year.
Every
This is
binding.
very comprehensive. I read through the whole thing last night.
Oh, great.
It's very comprehensive.
Good. Gold star to you, Senator. That's
Yeah.
impressive. There's a lot
I do have one question on the table of contents.
Okay.
Under section 4, line item 5, under section 4, it says Barton Housing Infrastructure. And that does not exist anywhere else in here except for right there,
I think that's just a typo.
because Barton is alphabetically right next after Barry.
I think we must have just had a list of towns and.
Yeah.
There, maybe that was a berry that got changed.
Well, Barton's one of my towns, so I'm like, oh, look, my district.
Appreciate
Yes.
this scrutiny, Senator. No, I'd say just disregard. I think that's meant to, reflect Brattleboro, I believe. So if there's, Barry and Bennington should be in there, right? And then the third kind of specific project is Brattleboro. But thank you for flagging. Any other questions just generally on the booklet before we dive in here? Okay, so, speaking of the cash fund, I promise I know how to talk about other things, but I do think sort of starting with a high level revenue review, and I know we spent some time talking about this a couple of weeks ago, so I'll move quickly, but if, committee members would indulge me in starting at the back of the worksheet. So the spines like this, I think, this way, should begin with line 139 and end with line 188. And the bottom line says balance of deficit. So I'll start on line 172, kind of under section 18, just to again refresh and orient the committee to the parameters that we work within when we are constructing the capital bill. The primary historical, and in this case, primary funding source for capital projects is the biennial authorization recommendation for bonds forwarded by the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, or CDAC. That recommendation given on line 172 is $100 million. Members will remember from prior testimony across 2 years, so split evenly, let's say, would be $50 million in each year. On line 173 below that, there's an additional about $6.9 million from bond premium. Senators Harrison and Ingalls would remember from last year's discussion what this is a little technical, but I think it's worth addressing since this is sort of foundational to how bills funded. When we go out to bond, let's say for $100 million of projects, because remember our issuance of bonds does not always line up with like the timing of capital bills. We go out to bond on a reimbursement basis, largely based on the amount of capital spending that's happening. So we look kind of on an ongoing basis, how many capital bill projects have gone out the door, have been paid for using the state's general cash balance. And then we bond to generate revenue to reimburse those expenditures. And so that timing is dictated largely on project flows. And so when we go out to bond, say we're bonding to reimburse $100 million in capital spending, based on a variety of factors I won't get into here, market conditions and investor confidence in the state of Vermont, we may garner a premium on that bond issuance. So investors say, oh, I'm willing to pay a little bit extra for a Vermont bond because I love Vermont, because I think they're fiscally sound. And that premium amount gets factored in before we close on that issuance, incorporated into the amount of revenue that we need to generate. So we need to generate $100 million in revenue, but say we had $5 million in bond premium, we actually only go out and bond for $95 million because we're getting $5 million from the premium. So we're fully funding all of our projects, but we're only expending $95 million of the prior year capital bill authorizations to bond for that full $100 million. So there's that $5 million delta that this body authorized in terms of bonding to support capital projects X, Y, Z, and W, but it turned out not to be needed because of the bond premium. So the practice is to reinvest that bond capacity in future year capital bills, which is why it shows up here. So it's a little bit of a technical in the weeds thing, but I just think it's worth taking a moment to explain. So in addition to the CDAC authorization of $100 million, there's 6.8 based on premium garnered in our most recent issuance in 2024. State Treasurer's Office, I'm sure, would be very happy to come in and talk about what a successful sale we had. There was actually a lot of interest in our bonds, which is a great thing. It's a testament, I think, to our high ratings and fiscal discipline as a state. So you add 50, looking at the FY26 column, you add 50 to 6.9. You also add to that amount the total given above on line 169 to 3.1. That's the sum total of all the prior year capital reallocations we're proposing. So those are prior year capital projects that for whatever reason either came in under budget or the project closed out and there was an amount authorized in a prior bill that wasn't needed. So we're proposing to reallocate those appropriations moving forward. So you add the 3.1, the 5, the 6.9, and you get a total, which is given in column E on line 185 of $110 million. And that's the total kind of bond capacity for this capital budget. I'll pause there quickly in case any questions on any of that. Okay. Add to that, and this is the point I've been in earlier to discuss, we have this cash fund construct. The state of Vermont has codified in statute this cash fund transfer, which I had described as 4% of the last completed fiscal year's general fund appropriations, less current year debt service estimates. Again, very briefly, the idea there being as we have continued on this trajectory of declining of bond issuances, we've sort of benchmarked 4% based on historically how much of the general fund budget we were spending on the capital bill. And as our debt service payments drop below that, which is a great thing for us and for taxpayers, that delta, that difference, we are reinvesting in the capital bill via the cash fund per the statutory construct. So per 32 VSA 1001B, that calculation in FY26 comes out to be $14.8 million. Added to that is $826 million in prior year interest earned on the fund. The cash fund is one of several special funds that retains its own interest.
814,000.
Did I say million?
Yeah.
Well, if only, right? Yes.
Oh, you're excited.
Yeah, that's a lot of interest.
I thought it was better.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, 826,000. And added also to that is $1.2 million that was left on the bottom line of the cash fund last year after what I described as a lot of activity sort of late in the session where there were some transfers made from the cash fund to other bills to fund other priorities. And just in all of the moving pieces, there was about $1.2 million that was unallocated. Yeah.
So I have a question on that. So the fund balance, the reallocations are not part of the fund balance, but the reallocations are.
So the reallocations would have been, those are in a different fund because those are bonded dollar appropriations. So if you're looking at like the reallocations given in column B, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what those technically are is a reallocation of prior spending authority that was authorized in capital bills. So those don't actually represent a fund like dollars in a bank account somewhere, right? Because it's the authority to pursue those projects. And then the assumption under the bonding scenarios, we would go out and reimburse those costs once those projects happen.
Okay, so the cash fund balance is the cash
So
that was
cash
left
is-
over just from last year?
So yeah.
Or did it accumulate from previous years?
It could be it's the cumulative amount that was, it was I guess to be technical, it was the unallocated balance on a budgetary operating basis. So this is getting really in the weeds, but there's kind of two ways of looking at fund accounting. There's sort of a budgetary basis that we look at here and that all of our conversations are based in. And then there's your financial reporting and your ACR and stuff. And the fund balance, the actual dollars and cents in a fund at a given time goes up and down based on project flows. What we're looking at here is the amount of possible spending authority that was left undesignated at the end of the fund. So this doesn't actually have anything to do with projects or actual fund balances left over. This is just, there was so much money meant to be in the fund And the legislature in its final construct authorized a plan to spend all of it except for $1.2 million. There was an amount that was left untouched, unaccounted for. And so we're proposing that should be part of the construct this year.
Okay.
So you add all those three lines together, there's about $17 million in cash flow for capital purposes. That's about the most technical I hope the presentation will get. I appreciate everyone's forbearance for that, but I think it's a good place to start just to give kind of a high level picture of what's available. So pause in case there are any questions on that. Okay, so I'm gonna flip over back to the front of the worksheet then. Just take the committee, if it works for you, Madam Chair, on a quick high level tour of the appropriations here and sort of the sections. So starting with section 2, which is the Agency of Administration, ostensibly Buildings and General Services, BGS. The first couple lines here, major maintenance, planning, reuse, and contingency, and physical security enhancements. These are kind of capital bill regulars. These are in the bill pretty much every year. And these fund sort of more general categories of projects. Super important kind of cornerstone appropriations to keep the operations of the state running. Everything else that doesn't fit into a project specific line somewhere else is largely funded by one of these. So sure BGS can come back and speak eloquently about those. But
Thank you. And we did have a presentation from BGS. You guys will remember the buildings that were in this. So Nick, if you could just talk a little bit about why you chose $8 million in cash this year and 8.5 million bonded next year.
Sure. So it's a great question, Madam Chair. And I think it's important to highlight that ultimately it doesn't matter that much from a programmatic standpoint. The cash fund, as I've said before, and the bonded appropriations are designed intentionally to be to have parity between them in terms of the use, what kind of projects are eligible. So there's no real reason, and that's intentional because we want the cash fund to be, a holistic part of the budget. So with that caveat, philosophically, I suppose, there's this intergenerational argument about bonding and whatnot. Some of the projects in major maintenance, and I'll of course defer to my BGS colleagues on this, might be slightly sort of nearer term projects, not all of them certainly, but if you think about, okay, what are we going out to bond for that's a 20-year payback versus what are we paying for upfront in cash? In all three of these cases, it seemed like there were enough investments in the mix that you could pretty reasonably make a case for cash funding. But that's kind of one answer. I think the truth is it doesn't really much matter which appropriation goes where.
Okay, thanks.
Great. 3-acre parcel stormwater compliance. The 3-acre rule may not be news to anybody in this room. This is a statewide regulation that has been long impending and is taking effect in a couple of years or soon, I believe. And we have a number of buildings at the state of Vermont that the state owns that are not in compliance with the 3-acre rule that will take effect. So this appropriation would help to bring us into compliance there.
Yeah, just in case there are folks watching it who are not familiar with this, it's basically a pollution control requirement of EPA.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Art in State Buildings is a statutorily codified program. It's exactly what it sounds. There's some examples around us, and I think that this may be the curator's work specifically, but this is a pretty stable appropriation year over year. The Asa Bloomer building in Rutland, members will perhaps be familiar, is a large building that hosts a number of state agencies. There's a need for a couple different maintenance needs down there. The most pressing are the need for some sewage system upgrades. This appropriation will fund those. On the next line down, attached to the Asa Bloomer building, there's a large parking garage that is in need of some structural reinforcements, and some kind of pressing life safety repairs. So that's the 600,000 in FY 26 there. Pittsford Academy is the Criminal Justice Training Council administered the law enforcement and fire safety training facility in Pittsburgh. This appropriation would fund an extension and a roof covering for their firing range, which is currently open to the elements. And so looking out the window, the members can imagine what that's like this time of year and some of the safety issues that presents. Two State House items next, the replacement of historic finishes. This is affectionately the David Sheets appropriation. This funds all the beautiful stuff that keeps this building kind of the gem that it is. State House repointing would be for some work on the exterior of the building to help prevent some water infiltration issues in recent years. And so this is some work to help address that. The 120 State Street, that's the building immediately across the quad that hosts, among other departments, the DMV. That building needs a pretty comprehensive overhauling of many of its systems and HVAC systems. That is a project that has been ongoing and will continue to be kind of a major priority of the capital bill. This appropriation gets that started. You can see in the 10-year plan, that's sort of an indication of more work to come there. And I should just briefly outline. So these 10-year plan items, members will have noticed, and there's FY 26, cash fund, FY 27, this governor's recommend, that's the current biennium we're talking about. And then these 10-year plan items are a snapshot at this point in time of some of the projects we anticipate coming down the pike. I emphasize some and a snapshot because it's really difficult to anticipate what capital projects we're going to need. The pressing priorities pop up all the time. Some things that are on this list will disappear by the time we get to the next session. So there's a lot of play there, but it's really meant to give this committee and your House counterparts a flavor of some of what's in the pipeline. So just continuing on quickly, the Middlesex items here, there's one for finishing the roof replacement of the State Archives building in Middlesex. A portion of the roof has already been replaced. This would finish the balance of that project. There are a lot of pretty valuable historic items in that building. It's important to keep the water out. Print and postal uninterruptible power supply upgrades. So the print shop that we were just lauding for these booklets get a lot of really expensive and fine-tuned equipment that's particularly susceptible to issues when there are power outages. So an uninterrupted power supply will kind of continue to both ensure smooth operations for crunch times when we need things printed, and they offer a lot of other services besides printing. They also help safeguard some of that. Waterbury State Office Complex. So following Hurricane Irene, there was a lot of work done, obviously, to the State Office Complex of Waterbury. One thing that was not addressed at the time, because they were in pretty good shape, were the roofs. A lot of those roofs are historic slate roofs. They're nearing the end of their life now, and many of them due for replacement. So there's a significant appropriation in here to do that work. And lastly, at 32 Cherry Street in Burlington, there's a parking garage. We have made some investments in that building in recent capital bills. Certain senators will remember. This is sort of the balance of the work due there to shore up that structure. So some similar stuff, I believe, to the garage in Rutland, salt and studded snow tires and all the other lovely things we have in Vermont are not kind to parking garages. They tend to need some TLC. On the 10-year plan, these are items, so now is line 18 and 19. These are not current capital appropriations, but things that are coming on the horizon. The EPA has kind of a phased plan for the phase out of certain refrigerants that have atmospherically troubling shelf lives, I guess, implications for our environment. R22 and R410 are two among them. And so as time goes on, and there has been a lot of work done to do this already, but sort of an ongoing work stream to replace state equipment and bring up to compliance with those EPA regulations. Pittsford, that's the same academy mentioned with the firing range extension. There's the possibility of some major upgrades there in future years to sort of their main. So again, a lot of information, fairly high level. I'm happy to take if there are any questions, or I can keep moving through.
Looks like we're good.
Okay. AHS is ostensibly the DOC section. These are primarily Department of Corrections appropriations. The first one is an area that the state has been investing a lot of money in recent years, and for good reason, continues to be a very high priority for the legislature and the administration both. These are to bring all of our facilities up to kind of modern current standards with HVAC systems, so air conditioning in the summer. These are difficult facilities, as in this committee's already, I'm sure, heard and will continue to hear to work in many different ways, both for staff and for residents, that ensuring kind of the best living and working conditions is a high priority. They're also difficult facilities to do work on because of the nature of operations and the hardness and some security concerns. So there are often substantial appropriations, but this is a top priority, and this appropriation will fund the work to bring all but one facility up to kind of top compliance. That last facility is the Northwest State Correctional Facility, which is undergoing some modifications and construction for some other projects, and itself has kind of a higher price tag to do that, but that's what's reflected on the 10-year plan for the next installment of that.
Okay, so to learn more about this, that would be BGS or
The
corrections or both?
Would want to hear probably from both BGS,
Okay,
primarily BGS on the work, and then DOC could speak to their operations side and programmatic pieces.
okay. But the intent is that the funding of these 2 years, right? Or is it just 1 year?
Should be 5 million in FY26 and 1 million in
Okay,
FY26.
so the 6 million is going to handle all but one facility.
Correct.
Okay.
The next line down for ADA compliance, the Department of Corrections has been engaged in an ongoing settlement with the Department of Justice related to some ADA compliance issues. This is another area we've funded in the past. That settlement has been extended through October 31st of 2025, so into the beginning of FY26. This appropriation here is the amount we anticipate needing to finish the work that we need to do and come into compliance fully across the portfolio of correctional
And
facilities.
Chittenden is one of them, which is the one that we're going to be replacing.
So there are some, that's correct, Madam Chair,
Okay.
yeah. We're abiding by the terms of the settlement. Bring our currently operational facilities up into compliance. Correctional facility safety and security upgrades. This is similar to some of the appropriations in the BGS section at the top. This is an appropriation that funds a lot of sort of smaller items. Smaller, which is not to say less important. These are in fact often security upgrades and camera replacements and system changes that are necessary for PREA compliance, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, so federal standards that set kind of what your level of infrastructure needs might be in the facility. And so a lot of those are funded out of this line. This is an important priority to the Department of Corrections. The next two lines fund kind of in a similar vein, door control system replacements at two facilities, just getting started in Rutland at Marble Valley and sort of finishing up work in St. Johnsbury. These are kind of system-wide overhauls to what are now older security systems, and this would bring those facilities up into compliance with current industry standards. St. Albans roof replacement, that is a project that has been ongoing and has seen investments in the past. This appropriation here would help to finish out that project. Up in Newport at the Northern State Correctional Facility, there are sprinkler system upgrades. I believe that's in the same category of something that we've funded in the past. This is sort of a cost true up to finish out the project, complete that work.
So in your process, were there any repairs or major upgrades that were not included in this? That, I don't know if that's an appropriate question to ask, but
Specifically DOC? Or
yes,
in
yes,
general?
for DOC.
So I think it's fair to say that, you know, we go through a very similar process to this body. There are always more requests
Yeah,
than we have funding available for. And that doesn't, we could bond. My personal hypothesis is there's no magic number, right? There's so much like work that needs to be done. We work really closely with departments. The administration's process begins in August. We put out budget instructions. We ask for submissions from departments by October. We generally sit down with departments and review their requests and get into the level of detail that you will with folks as they can justify and work through kind of the usual prioritization questions. Those difficult, like if we only have this much money to spend and we're choosing between good things, you know, what's top priority for the department? What are sort of top priorities in terms of life safety, critical operations? And so, yes, I think short answer, there are often things that either get sort of strategically positioned in the 10-year plan or put on pause for.
okay, and we can talk to corrections about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you'll find is that throughout that process, you know, it's meant to kind of build understanding and consensus among the
Yes.
administration, and we're all here presenting what's the governor's recommended budget. Sort of kind of baked into this document are some of those prioritizations that happen.
Yes.
So on the 10-year plan in this section, there was a couple items. I'll just to sort of address it below. There's an item for the Newport Northern State boiler replacement. That's a project that was funded in the prior year. And there's enough of an outstanding appropriation to carry that project forward. There's also been some pretty significant equipment order delays given kind of sector capacity strain. So at this point, the not a recommendation to provide any more funding in the current capital bill for that, but members will note on the 10-year plan, there is some anticipated funding in the next capital bill to close up that project. The Women's Correctional Facility, I just was saving for last just because it's sort of by dollar amount, one of the larger projects this committee will be talking about. For members, Madam Chair, have you all as a committee spent any time talking about this project? I don't want to.
We've spent a little bit of time.
Okay.
I mean, last year we spent a lot of time, but we have spent some time, but it would be very helpful to understand what the financial.
So the state has 6 correctional facilities, one for women in South Burlington, the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. I think there is general agreement that facility is in poor condition. There are a number of quality of life issues and operational concerns, both for residents of the facility and for staff that work there. It's been a high priority of both the administration and the legislature in recent years to contemplate a replacement facility that would be more in line with modern principles of kind of corrections and more of a rehabilitative type of institution. There's been a lot of discussion in this building about what that should look like, and I anticipate there will continue to be. We have in prior capital bills set aside about $16 million for that project. The full project cost is anticipated to be quite a bit more than that. It's been a moving target over the years, but orders of magnitude, multiples of that number That project, I won't get into too much detail here, only because there are other experts within state government much better qualified to speak to the particulars. Some of them are sitting here in the room with us, but that project is a really big one. There's a lot involved and a lot of moving pieces. Finding a site, a suitable location for the new facility is a big component of that. Discussions are ongoing with a number of potential sites. There've been some conversations with the municipality of Essex about 2 potential sites. It's a big project, it's a long project, and it's a complicated project. And there is $16 million already appropriated, the majority of which has not been spent to date. That amount should be more than adequate to keep the project moving as those discussions progress in the next couple of years. Given all of the other budgetary pressures we're facing this year, we didn't feel like it was appropriate or necessary to put in more money for the correctional facility in this capital bill, but you will see it reflected on the 10-year plan. Of course, if that project began to accelerate, and which is highly unlikely, but that it would chew through the $16 million. But if it did, and there was a need for future funding in say this time next year, we could certainly be here having a conversation as part of the capital bill adjustment to add more funds to that project. So it's an ongoing priority, and it's certainly something that's on many people in this building's radar. But I wanted to provide that context for decision making behind the appropriation. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Yeah, and this is actually really, it's very helpful that you did the future years on this project, because otherwise you look at it.
Right, so that's exactly, Madam Chair, what the 10-year plan is intended to convey is, everything that's on our radar. So the next section, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, there's a couple items here at the beginning, which are fairly familiar capital bill items. These kind of occur every year. Major maintenance at statewide historic sites that funds a variety of projects across the portfolio of sites managed by the Division of Historic Preservation. Underwater historic reserves are a bunch of really cool shipwrecks in Lake Champlain that we maintain and have a really outsized tourist attraction value and sort of help spur some economic development in the state. And then these next 3 items, Bennington, Barry, and Brattleboro, Senator Douglas, are 3 projects. These are a little bit, I would say, like an innovative thing we're doing in the capital bill this year. These are 3 projects that are all housing related. These are all appropriations for housing infrastructure. These would flow through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to the municipalities in question, who are all heavily involved with each of these projects. These projects were chosen from a list of many, many projects that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development maintains, and if of course are the state entity that has their finger on the pulse of everything that's going on in terms of housing development in the state. We wish we could fund all of them, right? I think we all collectively wish we could fund everything. These 3 were chosen based on their project readiness, or the stage that they're at in terms of design and funding conversations, negotiations, the amount of non-state funding that these appropriations would help leverage. So in each case, these are just a small portion of the overall funding stack. The example I give is the Bennington project, which I think is like a $40 million+ project in total. And it's a massive, I am excited for the committee to hear more from ACCD on this. And that project is contemplating like 30 housing units and a child care center and a mixed residential space. So some really cool things.
I'm jealous.
Going on down there. And these appropriations in all cases were pretty key to helping those projects get across their funding finish line. So the governor, as I think he highlighted in his speech yesterday, is particularly focused on housing. I think most people in this building are particularly focused on housing. We're really excited that the capital bill had the capacity to be able to make these investments. And we feel like these are really strong return on investments in terms of what we're providing to help finish these projects up and get some new units created. They help address the housing challenge that we have in the state, not new to
Great, so we'll have ACCD in to talk about those.
Great. We're proposing a bit of just a 2-year pause on roadside historic site markers. Those I'm sure members will have noticed on the side of the road, there's little plaques that say, so and so lived here and this is what they did. Those are a great program and important and have their own fan club, I'm given to understand, for people who drive around the state just looking for those. We're just pausing this year based on overall capacity constraints, and those should be back in the next calendar year.
Okay, can I ask a question? So, so that would be the historic preservation folks who would come and talk to us about that.
To that, yeah.
The major maintenance and statewide historic sites, that is not, or are those
That would have to
the,
be the Division of
grants?
Historic Preservation. Now, the grants would be next.
okay, because that's a bigger number than the grants.
Right.
Or,
Right.
okay,
that-
so these are places that the state owns.
So, yeah, so that's
Okay.
maintenance on state-owned sites.
Okay, and they would probably be the ones.
Division of
historic.
Preservation can speak to both those and the historic preservation grants, the blind preservation grants in the next section.
Yeah,
That's what we'll talk
great.
about. So section 5, speaking of the building communities grants, I mean, I'll take these, I think, as a lump, just in the interest of time here. These are all pretty much level funded with prior capital bills, and their sort of historic funding levels. Each of these lines funds competitive grant program, all of which have really important benefits through the state, help elevate and advance projects in our small communities and our bigger communities. And really, I think a lot of these have some real multiplier effect. So again, I'm not meaning to shortchange their importance. Just kind of as a section, there's not a lot of play here in terms of compared to prior capital bills, but I would encourage the community to do it. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I'm clear on this, and all these grants are state grants,
Right.
and it's not one without federal funding.
My understanding is that these are all state grant, whether or not, like in some of them, projects might also be drawing down federal money from other grant opportunities. I can't say, but there's no, as far as I know, there's no design in any of these to explicitly fashion.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So yeah, the Division of Historic Preservation administers the top two. I think the Cultural Facilities Program is maybe a partnership between BGS and the Vermont Arts Council. The recreational facilities, human services, through regional economic development, those are all grants administered by BGS, so they will be the ones to speak to that. And then the agricultural fair grants are administered by the agriculture. Big surprise there. So those are to speak to you.
Great.
The Veterans Home in Bennington, there are 2 requests this year. One is for the R22 phase out we talked about earlier to come into compliance with EPA refrigerant regulations. The facility down there has a number of air handlers that are not in compliance. This would fund that. The expanded laundry facility, as members can imagine, for a facility like the Vets Home, it's pretty critical to have line operational laundry facilities. A lot of their equipment is currently approaching the end of its life. This would provide both some replacement costs and some necessary reconfigurations, I think, to the space to accommodate some new equipment down there. There's 3 items on the 10-year plan. Are there kind of project specific possibilities for the Vets Home coming up? I don't want to spend much detail just in the interest of time here, but there are narrative descriptions in the capital booklet, and certainly the Vets Home could speak to those and then testify. The University of Vermont and the Vermont State Colleges, there's a precedent in the capital bill for us providing funding to these important partner institutions. Members can look back through the history and see how those have been. The University of Vermont obviously is a critical piece of the state's overall economic picture. We try to provide what support we can to help them with deferred capital needs and major maintenance. This year, we are recommending $3.2 million total over the course of the millennium. The state colleges, similar, where there's a $3 million appropriation for kind of general maintenance and renovation to keep operations running smoothly. And then there's an appropriation on line 80 for a specific project, the Johnson campus heat plant is kind of nearing the end of its serviceable life. It's hard to find replacement parts, I gather, and the potential implications if that were to fail are pretty catastrophic for that campus. So this is an appropriation designed to help them with that replacement.
And that's not the laboratory, right?
That is not the library. That's coming up in section 4.
Oh,
Section 9, the Agency of Natural Resources. These will largely be familiar to prior capital appropriators. There's nothing in this section, no type of projects that are radically different from prior years. Some of the numbers have changed around. The top line, I think DEC can speak in much more detail, but I'll just flag both line 85 here, this 20% match for federal EPA drinking water state revolving fund. That's what that acronym stands for. And it's on line 97 in the next page in the clean water section. But there's the clean water state revolving fund. That's also a state match for a federal funding opportunity. Both of those are zeroed out in FY26. So that's not because those programs are on hold, but because last year the final federal awards were less than we anticipated than when we were writing the capital budget. And so if you have less federal money coming in, you need less state match. So there was some leftover appropriation, which we carried through the current school year. You can see on in column B in FY27, we are proposing match for those appropriations.
so question on those, looking at the 10 years,
Yeah.
the amounts go up significantly.
Yeah, so those are based, I think, Madam Chair, on DC's anticipated estimate of need. I think there's a chance, though I don't want to get out over my skis, and I'd really defer to DEC to come in.
Okay,
with more
we'll get
more
that.
detail. But yeah, I think obviously there are lots at play at the moment in terms of federal funding, but I would say generally, just since that may be a consideration this committee is weighing, much of the stuff that's in the capital bill is kind of bread and butter infrastructure investments, right? So not necessarily the type of investment that some recent federal guidance has called out in terms of being looked at more scrutiny. So I think generally these are the types of investments we expect to keep seeing from the federal government, but obviously there's a lot to learn on that front moving forward. Dam safety, I think we've all probably experienced, certainly anybody hit by the precipitation events in recent years, the importance of our dams. The state has a pretty extensive portfolio of them. Lots of them need pretty extensive repairs. You can also see that reflected in the 10-year plan. This fund's kind of the top most pressing priorities for DEC by any other. FPR, there's two line items here. The first for sort of general infrastructure improvements across the portfolio of state of FPR owned facilities and land, which is significant. And there's also some money in there for the 3-acre rule compliance for those sites. Next line down is for sort of peripheral access infrastructure investments. Those are often on like adjacent parcels or the things that help facilitate access to state recreational assets. Certainly could come in and speak at length about either of those. Fish and wildlife major maintenance, that appropriation covers a host of investments, but you think about everything from fishing access sites to our fish hatcheries, to wildlife management areas, to the conservation camps that are run by Fish and Wildlife. There's sort of diverse portfolio of things that appropriation.
So this is all of the hatcheries?
So this would include, repairs necessary for,
Does it assume anything with the Salisbury fish hatchery?
this appropriation is not specifically tied to any plan for the Salisbury hatchery. The current law as passed by this body and the stands on it. Fish and Wildlife. Speak more detail. Section 10, we are sort of nearing the end here, I promise. Section 10 is the clean water section. This is in line with the recommendations of the Clean Water Board, which committee members may know is sort of a third party statutorily enabled entity that's charged with making recommendations for how we meet our clean water goals. As a state, there's a clean water budget of about $40 to $50 million every year. The bulk of that budget is comprised of a special fund called the Clean Water Fund, which has its own funding sources. And that lives primarily in the operating budget, but traditionally there's a component of the capital bill every year that's dedicated to that budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Wasn't that usually about 10 million?
The amount in the capital bill?
Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, so it's less, it's 7 million less. I mean, I think in the last few capital bills, I think it's been like $10 million. I thought.
So just to clarify, Senator, the section total here, which is on line 106, is still $10 million.
Okay, there we go.
That's
Okay, I saw the 3,000 and
Yeah.
I should have waited until you went down for.
No, it's a good, astute eye, Senator. I appreciate that. No, that 3 million is just for the agricultural portion of that. So the way that it works is the Clean Water Board, which is comprised of administration representatives and some public sector members, they get together every year and have a pretty extensive public process. All of those meetings are recorded and online for anybody that's interested. And they determine their recommendations of how the general clean water budget and including this capital bill piece should be allocated to state entities. So these recommendations, 3 million for ag water quality, 4 million for municipal pollution control, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all in line with the clean water recommendations, totaling 10 million. And as some committee members will,
You would tell them I'm not going ahead of you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so as some committee members will remember, the second year, because that's an annual process that the Clean Water Board meets to make those recommendations, what we typically do in the first year of the biennial capital bill is just include a placeholder for that second year. So that's what that $10 million line is on 104. So we'll be back next year during the capital budget adjustment to work those out. The military has a general maintenance line that these all military funds, I would say, generally leverage pretty significant federal match. It's usually a 25 to 75% match rate. Sometimes it varies based on the project. I think that's fair to say. So this top line is sort of general maintenance and renovations across the state armory portfolio. This second line on 110 is the state match for planning and design money for the Northwest Regional Readiness Center, which is part of a larger strategic plan the military department has to consolidate. We have a pretty vast portfolio of smaller state armories currently. Many of those are approaching the end of their serviceable life or sort of not in alignment with the department's programmatic needs or the Guard's needs. So they're moving towards larger super facilities that have more of a regional presence to replace. And so it's ultimately a cost savings, perhaps, in terms of consolidating some of our footprint. But this is design money for what would be one of those larger facilities. And then the Southern Regional Readiness Center on the line below, that would be next up in the queue. Your astute House colleagues did point out there's a typo in that. It says Southern instead of Regional Readiness Center. So
Wow, good for them.
That when
Being alert.
Yeah. Agency of Ag, so, the chair had asked about the Vail Lab, so it's coming up. Firstly, the building, in Springfield, Massachusetts, there's the Eastern States Exposition, which is a huge fair, one of the biggest in the country. Vermont has a building in that space. It's one of the highest visitation sites for Vermont. It has a massive economic impact. We bring vendors down to sell their wares, and I actually think that's some of the more exciting testimony. It's really great always to hear from Ag on all the good stuff that happens down there. So these are improvements to that building. The Randolph campus of the State Colleges System, formerly the VTC, and the Vermont Agricultural and Environmental Laboratory, or VAIL, lab, they share a heat plant. There have been a number of discussions in recent years about that. We built the heat plant and we built the VAIL lab not super long ago. They have very different programmatic needs. As you can imagine, the VAIL lab is a scientific institution conducting pretty high sensitivity tests. They need very specific conditions to be met, including like a pretty constant steam pressure from the heat plant. If you're the college and you've got, an academic off season, Christmas or the summer, it would be really nice to be able to turn down the thermostat, right? Not keep your heat plant running full tilt. So those sort of diverging programmatic needs have been the point of discussion in recent years. This appropriation would help make upgrades to the existing heat plant, which is itself pretty old and could use some investment, and also some adjustments that would help sort of disaggregate those needs and help meet the programmatic needs of the lab. Section 13, Department of Public Safety, is sort of similar to the military in that they have this strategic capital plan we've been working through. Some members may be familiar with the Williston Police Barracks that was just completed in recent years. That's an example of, as they've been going through, the type of project where they're in many regions in the state, they have existing barracks that have either programmatic or logistical challenges, and they're looking to upgrade and replace and expand regional presence. And so that's what these field station appropriations are for. Shaftesbury would be planning potentially land acquisition if we can't find a state site, and design money to get that project started. The bulk of the cost coming in FY20 in future capital bills. And then the Rutland Field Station, this would be funding getting that project really rolling. There's already been a site identified. St. Johnsbury next on the list. Judiciary, there's a couple different things going on here. The first one, nominally smaller, is a backup power system for the Woodstock Courthouse. That courthouse has been a particularly key piece in judiciary operations as renovations have been ongoing in White River, the White River Courthouse. That's next line down. When power goes out, they've got backup power for a couple hours max, and then everything has to shut down. And we have this really significant backlog in the courts. That type of thing doesn't help it. So this sort of just helps keep continuous operations rolling in the judicial system. The White River Junction Courthouse renovation, that's a project that received some appropriations in the prior capital bill. It's ongoing. This is the amount necessary we anticipate to finish that project.
Do they call that the major earmark?
Depends who you're talking.
Okay, I just wonder, I mean, he's kind of new here, he's got $8 million already. I guess we gotta be talking a little bit about that.
It's a significant project.
It's who you know, not what you know, that's for sure.
And I think both BGS, and I'm sure the judiciary would be happy to speak to that.
Is the total project amount greater than it was?
Last year, well, this is an additional appropriation.
Right, but were we aware that we would need?
I would
Something like
defer
$8 million?
to the project
Okay.
management folks, I think.
Yeah, well, that's them.
Better equipped to speak to that. The Essex County Courthouse, for those familiar with Guildhall, and there's that nice town square with the three buildings. This project would connect several of them kind of in the back. There's a number of programmatic advantages to that. I think the design includes a sally board and some segregation space for jurors from the public, which can be a real risk for this trial. We're fortunate to have a pretty broad coalition of stakeholders that have contributed to that project. They have design documents fairly well along, hence the sort of more specific dollar appropriation there. And
So this is for, excuse me, this is for, construction, I believe, right?
would be for construction.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is Madam Chair, because I've been involved with it, is bringing this courthouse up to standards probably for the next 25 years.
Okay.
In Newport, their committee members will remember there's been ongoing conversation about the Newport courthouse. I think fair to say that those conversations are ongoing. There are two adjacent buildings that host a variety of functions in Newport. There are some serious programmatic and security issues in the current configuration. So there's been ongoing discussion about a change up there. There's been some prior year appropriations made to this project. This amount reflects kind of what we anticipate is necessary to keep the project moving, with the acknowledgement that some of those discussions are ongoing and will take time.
Okay.
The one item that's on the 10-year plan and not in the current capital bill that was somewhat of the discussion last year is the Washington County Superior Court renovations. That's the court in Barry. It's kind of the same story as some of these other projects. You know, it's a big and complex undertaking. There are decisions that are going to have to be made about whether to invest in the current structure or relocate off site. Those obviously have implications for Barry and for the downtown. And given the sort of status of the project and overall team capacity, you know, there's only so many people in the state to move all these projects forward, and funding capacity. There are pretty significant prior year appropriations that should be able to carry that project forward, but we're just not including any additional appropriations at this point. It's an ongoing project. So really, it's home stretch here. The dry hydrant program is, you know, as a former member of my volunteer fire department where I grew up, I think these are pretty critical assets to have for fire departments, both paid and volunteer across the state, to be able to help put out fires. These are grants administered by the Department of Public Safety. And this is a pretty recurring line item in the capital bill. The Historic Society, Vermont Historic Society, there's an appropriation for $700,000 to help with mitigation of some water infiltration. They've been getting inundated in recent really heavy precipitation events. This is the Spalding Building in Barry, right as you're going up the hill up 302 towards East Barry. Department of Libraries is also housed in that building. Some other state entities, and there's some really about like the Middlesex State Archives building, some really important and critical stuff housed in that building. So this appropriation would address kind of the most pressing mitigation issues. And then lastly, on the 10-year plan, we penciled in the possibility of helping them replace a sort of significant climate control instrument, also maintaining historic documents and artifacts. And we started with the reallocations and the revenue. So at that point, that's really the bulk of the spreadsheet. I'm happy to pause there if there are any questions. I have one last thing to discuss just based on policy recommendations, but kind of give everybody a second.
A breath.
A lot of words. I apologize. This is the same thing that happens every year, but hopefully it's a helpful overview, at least at a really high level.
Yeah. It's definitely helpful. And I think it's great that you start at the end. That's good. Are there questions, comments? Okay, let's hear the last.
So let's get to the end of it. So I would just draw committee members' attention to the bill itself, the draft that we are presenting. If you open your books and turn over the front cover, and then Bevan's letter, there's a draft capital bill. So you all will become intimately familiar with the format here in coming weeks. I won't spend any time. This is the actual implementation of that spreadsheet we just walked through. So all the projects laid out, all the appropriations, the sections line up with the spreadsheet. If you flip to, and there are a couple sort of technical sections which correspond to some of the revenue components, like the authorization for bonds, and so forth. But start the reallocations, that's section 17. But so starting section 19. 19 is the past fund appropriations themselves. I think it's just worth highlighting that the administration's strong belief continues to be that capital, that the cash fund appropriations belong in Kentville. I think I spoke about this last time, so you will find that. Awesome. That's all I'll say at this point about that. I do want to highlight subsection B on, it's not, pages aren't marked, but it's the page that starts with maintenance and food section funding. That subsection B under section 19 is unreserving $14.5 million that was set aside a couple of years ago, actually in fiscal year 24, for anticipated IIJA match needs for the Agency of Natural Resources. We knew when IIJA was passed that it was going to be implemented over the course of several years. We had a surplus in FY24 that we could use for that purpose. So we set aside the money, kind of stuck it in a reserve. Now it's come due, those IIJA funds are available, and we need that funding, or ANR needs that funding to draw down significant federal match. I don't have the exact amount in front of me. In some cases, it's as high as 12-1. In some cases, it's like 4-1. I mean, Secretary Moore and her team, I think, would be happy to come in and testify to that. But this is really kind of high value money, and it's being unreserved and appropriated here per a plan that was agreed upon a couple of years ago.
And it's the same amount, the 14.5?
Yeah, we reserved 14.5. We're unreserving 14.5.
Okay.
Because we had the foresight there because those amounts were largely set, I believe, by the feds. It was this amount would be available in this fiscal year. This schedule was sort of contemplated ahead of time. That's why we were able to accurately reserve. Section 20 is a recommendation for a modification to the cash fund statute. It's very much in line with things that I have presented before in this committee and the administration has presented this session and prior years. I've described the cash fund transfer. Current statute has, this is on the following page after subsection 20, there are the words up to in the description of the transfer. It's subsection B, subsection 1, subsection capital A. We're recommending annual transfers made by the General Assembly of 4% of the last completed fiscal year's general fund appropriations, period. Current law says 4% or less of the last completed fiscal. So obviously, if you say, oh, I'm going to stick $10 aside every month for my child's education, well, I'm going to stick $10 or less, right? Well, in fact, less could be nothing, and your child could not have a college education fund. So we feel strongly that in order for the cash fund to be successful, and ultimately, frankly, the capital bill to be successful, given the trajectory of bonding authorizations, that this is an important step to codifying that commitment. Obviously, the legislature has the power to not withstand in a given year anything they want, but we feel like this would really be an important piece to helping set that expectation and sort of shared commitment to the cash flow.
Those words are very powerful. Like a very big strikeout right there.
It's amazing what a difference of a couple words can be. Yeah, agreed.
And the made to a shall.
And exactly. Oh, and then I would highlight actually, so that is a powerful suggestion for sure. The end of that paragraph is really not very powerful, but I'll just clarify. That's more of a technical adjustment, clarifying that in the form, and this is getting really in the weeds, but that formula relies on a subtraction of the estimate of current debt service. Debt service can change a little bit depending on when we go out to bond and stuff. So we just want it to be really super clear in statute that it's the amount we're estimating at the time of budget preparation. It's always the concept that some clever discerning eye in our office flagged that, well, what happens if like it changes in the BAA? You then have to go back and change the statute. So that last piece, regardless of what happens above, I think is really technical.
I mean,
To see how.
I don't mind.
So I'll stop there and be happy to take
Yes.
other questions, but
That's really good.
Yeah, you got through the whole thing.
needs time.
Okay. Any questions? I mean, we'll obviously have
Not yet.
questions. Exactly. Exactly. But I think that was a good summary. Thank you. Good walkthrough. More than a summary. All right, well, if there's no questions, then we will let Nick go and we will have a bit of a break.
The last time with you this year, Mr. Kramer?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I'll be back. I'll be around. I will be gone at a certain point. If the doctors are correct, I will become dad in late March.
Oh my God.
Congratulations.
Oh, congratulations. What a good reason.
I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's great.
Thank you very
That's
much.
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and then we will take a break. Our next witness